Okay, so the Sunnah, we said, is the second source of Sharia law, and we want to provide a definition for the Sunnah. The Sunnah linguistically means way, lexical sort of meaning, but the Sunnah differs its meaning depending upon who's defining the word Sunnah. I mean, Sunnah in an Aqidah sense, the sense of the creed, is different than in the legalistic sense. It's different than in the hadith sense. And since we're discussing Usul al Fiqh, the definition which we want to be aware of regarding the word Sunnah is that, is what is given on page 11 of your booklet, that the Sunnah, it comprises the statements of the Prophet ﷺ, his deeds and his acquiescence or his approval of the statements and deeds of others. So the Sunnah, therefore, is three matters in a legalistic sense: his statements, his deeds, and his approvals. All right. Now, for the scholars of hadith, those who are studying hadith, okay, they add in the Sunnah his descriptions. I mean, in other words, descriptions of the Prophet. So, can somebody tell me why did not the scholars of Usul al Fiqh consider that the descriptions of the Prophet not be part of the Sunnah? Yes? That's correct. Abdullah? I couldn't hear you, I'm sorry. Right. Right, some of the descriptions are descriptions of habit. So, in other words, since Usul al Fiqh deals with law and deals with the legal value of the Sunnah, the scholars of Usul al Fiqh, in defining the Sunnah, only cared about those statements, deeds, and approvals which have a legal value too. But the descriptions of the Prophet, as Umar explained, like his complexion, his height, likewise his habits, they're not concerned with that. The scholars of Hadith, who are trying to gather the sum total of everything related to the life of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, are concerned with that. And so therefore, in a legalistic sense, the Sunnah is only regarding these three matters. Question or comment? Can I repeat what? Oh, three things, yes. Statements of the Prophet, the deeds of the Prophet, and his approval. Descriptions of the Prophet. This is not considered from the Sunnah in a legalistic sense. Okay. Now, the Sunnah, in the legalistic sense, and even in the non-legalistic sense, has come to us, has been transmitted to us in two ways. That which is mutawatir, and that which is ahad. And it's the same definition which we use for the recitations of the Quran. So who remembers what the word mutawatir, or can give me a definition of the word mutawatir? Yes. Right, but it's, okay, that's part of the definition. It was conveyed by a group, okay, yeah, yes. Right, so much so that, okay, that's the last part of the definition, right, but we're missing some ingredients in between. There's no room, right, there's no possibility of that it was a lie was initiated and spread, okay, or that an error was made in transmission. I mean, for instance, if somebody comes to you and tells you something, and he heard it from one person, it's possible that person lied to him. And so therefore what he's transmitting is a lie. And likewise, a group of people might witness something like a car accident, but they might transmit it in such a way that they may make an error. In other words, what they witnessed, or what they described that they saw, really is not what they saw, what occurred. Not that they had intended to lie, but they made an error in transmission. So the mutawatir transmission is such that so many people have transmitted from the Prophet through each link of the transmission that it precludes a possibility of having a lie being transmitted or an error in the transmission. And so therefore it has to end with something that they either heard the Prophet say something or they saw. It has to be something which goes back to the senses. Saw him do something, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and it, the brother who mentioned what it benefits, it gives us knowledge of the strength of the knowledge which is necessary knowledge. In other words, knowledge that you don't have to put a proof for. You don't have to put a deduction or reasoning for, like something which we gain from the five senses. I touch something, I touch a plate, a pot, right? It's hot, okay? I don't have to prove to myself why my hand hurts. No, because the knowledge is necessary, right? Okay? I'm sitting in a course in calculus, and they give me some sort of theorem, okay? I have to prove why that actually is true. It's an acquired knowledge. All right, now with that, so therefore the sunnah is of two degrees. The ahad sunnah, okay, doesn't have that strength as the mutawatir. And so since the ahad sunnah such, we are required to prove that the ahad sunnah actually was said by the Prophet ﷺ, or the deed was done by the Prophet ﷺ, or the approval was given by the Prophet ﷺ. And so therefore the ahad sunnah comes into the categories of sahih, or valid, or authentic, they can translate it, and hasan, which is good, and also da'if, which is weak. And within each category there are subcategories. The sahih and the hasan provide a foundation by which it passes that degree whereby which we can have certain amount of plausibility that the Prophet ﷺ said it, did it, or approved it, so we can base our religion upon it. While the da'if does not reach that criterion set, and so therefore we do not have that type of plausibility or probability that the Prophet ﷺ said, did, or approved it, and so therefore we cannot base our religious behavior upon that. Now, as a result, the issues of mustalah al-hadith, the issues of investigating into the chain of narration, the issues of the narrators and the various strengths and weaknesses of different narrators, that science known as mustalah al-hadith or hadith methodology is actually one of the sciences of Usul al Fiqh. Even though if you study it, you'll study it as a separate subject, its roots lie in Usul al Fiqh. And unfortunately, the course doesn't allow us to go into some of these issues. However, though, there are two texts, which I'd like to mention now, because I'm afraid I'll forget at the end of the class, when I will mention some other texts, which provide, I think, a basic introduction to the topic of Mustalah Hadith, which you can refer to. They're existing in the English language. The best text is by Muhammad Mustafa al-Azami. It's printed in the United States, and it's something like an introduction to Hadith, an introduction, I think this is the title, to Hadith methodology and literature. Somebody knows the title of that. And literature. Huh? That's the studies in early Hadith literature is another one, but I think this one is also methodology and literature. Anyway, it's a small book. It's maybe 100 or so pages by Muhammad Mustafa al-Azami, and it's printed in the United States. And that's the best book, I think, that is available in the English language that I'm aware of. The second book is something which was released maybe a year or so ago here in the United Kingdom by Shaykh Hassan, and it's like an introduction to Hadith, something. The Introduction to Science of Hadith is the title of it. Introduction to Science of Hadith, something like that. It's a smaller book. It covers some of the main issues. It provides an introduction, but a better introduction is Mustafa al-Azami, which is more detailed and gives more examples, I think, a little bit stronger as a text. Okay. Being that we should understand then that in terms of the legal value, though, of these three matters, the statements of the Prophet, the deeds and his approvals, these three aspects of the Sunnah are not of the same legal value. In other words, the value of his statements is much stronger than the value of his deeds, which is much stronger than the value of his approvals. And for that reason, when we come to the acts of the Prophet ﷺ, there's a different way of dealing with them than we deal with his statements, for example. The statements of the Prophet are understood to be commands and prohibitions for us. And it's our responsibility to follow and to comply to those commands and prohibitions based on the various verses in the Quran which command us to obey the Prophet ﷺ. There's a total of about 33 passages in the Quran. Moreover, there are many statements of the Prophet ﷺ in which he has commanded us to follow him and has linked obedience to him to that it entails obedience to Allah, and that to disobey him is to disobey Allah. However, when we come to the deeds of the Prophet ﷺ, what are the values of his deeds? What do his deeds represent? If the Prophet's statements are obligatory to us to follow, then what about his actions? What do his actions, the value of his actions? And we'll discuss that now. Are there any questions about what we've done so far? I saw a hand raised. Yes. Yeah, for some of the Da'if hadith, because this category, which we call Da'if or weak, goes up to even the fabricated and the spurious. Okay, that's all considered under the grouping of Da'if. So that which we know to be a lie against the Prophet ﷺ, obviously there's no knowledge value to it. But for the other ones, I mean, like where it might be implausible. Right? Yes? Yes, there's two issues here. Sometimes Da'if hadith, because we're talking about, I think one problem that sometimes people fail to understand is that when we're judging a hadith as Sahih, Hasan or Da'if, we're not judging its contents matter, all right, which is known as the actual text. What we're doing is we're judging the chain of narrators. Okay, that's what we're judging as Sahih, Hasan or Da'if. So you might have two chains. Let's say this is chain A and this is chain B. All right? Chain B might be weak and has this content. Chain A might have the same contents matter, but the narrators are stronger. So then the Da'if hadith would be raised to a Hasan because in view of the second chain of narrators, which strengthens that. All right? What was the other mention? What was the question again? Oh, acting upon it, right. Well, the scholars have a difference of opinion concerning the value of the weak hadith. Some scholars permit its use in what is known as the fada'il, or the virtuous acts. In other words, if there is an act which says that if a person does such and such, he will receive such and such reward. Some scholars feel that if the weak hadith is not that weak, all right, and so there is some possibility, even though it's implausible, even though it's improbable, that the Prophet ﷺ said it, but there's still some possibility that he said it. So on virtuous acts, we can accept it, as opposed to acting upon weak hadith in determining that which is lawful and that which is forbidden. Because over here, there must be a degree of certitude, all right? And so they say for the virtuous acts, if we can accept them based upon three stipulations. The first stipulation is that it cannot be very weak. In other words, if the cause of weakness is due to be one of the narrators being to be a known liar upon the Prophet ﷺ, that doesn't count as one of those hadith which can be accepted for the virtuous acts. All right. But the weakness has to be, for instance, the narrators were truthful, but there was one narrator who had a weak memory. So, there's a possibility that he could have erred upon the Prophet ﷺ in his transmission. Second of all, that the virtue to which that act is being mentioned has to be established in the Sharia. It is confirmed that it is from the Prophet's Sunnah to fast Mondays and Thursdays. Okay? So, Monday and Thursday fasting as a voluntary fast is already established in Sharia. If we come across a hadith now which says that if you fast on Monday and Thursday, there is a certain reward for it, okay, then you haven't introduced a new practice into the Sharia by that weak hadith, because it's already been established in the Sharia. Thirdly, one cannot affirm that weak hadith to the Prophet. So that the hadith is not that weak. What it gives a virtue for, some sort of rewarded mentions, right, or protection, that act has already been established in the Sharia by authentic evidences. And therefore, at the same time, while one is going to say that he cannot affirm that being the statement of the Prophet ﷺ, I mean, he cannot say the Prophet said with that type of, certitude, because that would be, because the hadith is weak, and in all likelihood the Prophet did not say that. Yes, Irma. Not really. Okay. Excellent. All right. Right. But that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about the virtuous act, which refer to that if you fast on Monday, such and such reward you'll have. Yes, coincides. It has to be already established in the Sharia. Okay, let's continue now. So, we now come to the issue of the matters of, so the issues of Mustalah Hadith, we said, are part of Usul al Fiqh, that our class time doesn't allow us to really get into this into detail. And one can refer to these books, two booklets, and two as a reference. Now we want to come to the legal value of the acts of the Prophet ﷺ. If the Prophet ﷺ did something, how can we interpret it, or how should we interpret it? Well, there's a lot of debate among the scholars of Usul al Fiqh concerning the legal value of the acts of the Prophet. But in general, the majority hold the following: that the acts of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam comprise two types of acts. Acts done to draw closer to Allah, and acts of habit. Acts done to draw closer to Allah, and acts of habit. Those acts which are done to draw closer to Allah, in other words, the Prophet ﷺ did that act as a way of worshipping Allah, as a means of worshipping Allah. The scholars have two opinions regarding their value. Some say it is obligatory to do those acts, and others say it is recommended. In other words, wajib and mandub. The acts of habit, they agree that it is indicative of that they are mubah. They are permissible to do. Of these two opinions, the strongest opinion is that the acts of the Prophet only indicate that that action is recommended, does not indicate that it's obligatory for us to do. So now we come to a text of the Sunnah describing an act of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. It shows us, if that act is an act of worship, the best opinion is that it shows us that it is recommended for us to comply to that Prophet's action. But it's not obligatory for us to do such. And so therefore, if we did not comply to the Prophet ﷺ's action, we would not be under the threat of punishment. We would not have sinned. Okay. If we come to one of the acts of habit by the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, it's indicative for us that it is permissible for us to do that act. But we will not so it's therefore mubah. So, the question now, the Prophet is described as growing his hair between his earlobes and his shoulder, as some narrations mention. Can one say now, what is the value of that with regards to us? Well, I mean, but when was it? Take it step by step, as we studied here. First of all, was the Prophet's growing his hair an act drawn to draw closer to Allah, or was it an act of habit? Abdullah? That's true. We need to look at the total supportive evidences. But let's say that's just all the evidences we have right then and there. It's an act of habit. Or that he wore 2 sandals from Yemen. Or that he rode a camel. I'm trying to give some examples that we could be certain about its value. Okay, an act of habit. So what does that mean for us? It means it's permissible. It's permissible for us to wear sandals from Yemen. Okay, it's permissible for us to ride a camel. It's permissible for us to grow our hair between our earlobes and our shoulder. As far as his act, like in the prayer, when he used to do the night prayer, his ruku' was like his standing, and his sujood was like his ruku', which was like his standing, and so forth. That shows it's mandub. Shows that it's mandub, because it's an act of worship. Obviously it's in prayer, right? And it's mandub. Is it obligatory now for us to make our night prayer that long? No. So when somebody doesn't make his night prayer like the way the Prophet made his night prayer, is he in sin? No. Obviously it's recommended. If you can stand up in your night prayer and pray like that, that's obviously recommended. Yes. I mean, their opinion is very weak, but it exists. That's why I mentioned it. Okay. But I mean, the strongest opinions, indeed the overwhelming majority of the scholars of Usul al Fiqh hold it to be recommended. Just a very few divergent voices hold it as obligatory. Now, the acts of mubah, these acts of habit, comes the next question. Okay, if I emulate the Prophet in these acts of habit, if I emulate the Prophet in those acts of habit of his, so I grow my hair long between my earlobes and my shoulder, I wear a turban on my head, I wear certain garments like the Prophet wore, okay, an izar, for instance, will I receive a reward for that? This is the next question. Okay, so if you emulate the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam in this, do you receive a reward? And the scholars have differed. One group of scholars say that you receive a reward only for your intention to follow the Prophet. I mean, while you're not receiving a reward for the growth of your hair, right, or for your wearing of the sandals, or for your wearing of the izar, or for eating certain foods that he ate, you're receiving a reward for your love of the Prophet and for your desire, your motive to follow him. But the act itself is permissible, so you do not receive a reward for it. And the other opinion is that you receive no reward. But the first opinion is stronger. That the act, the motive of love of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, the motive of trying to emulate him in his behavior, this is what is rewarded from Allah, by Allah, not the actual compliance to a certain act. Yes? Yes. Yes, because you're drawing closer to Allah by trying to resemble him in your behavior. And that's what worship is, to try to draw closer to Allah. As opposed to an act of habit, which you just do, right, because it's just a human need, or so there's no reward. I mean, in terms of majority and minority, I don't know, but I mean, the strongest opinion is that you do receive a reward for your intent to emulate him, for the love of the Prophet ﷺ. Previous one meaning what specifically? Yeah, that's what we're talking about, these acts of habit. This is what we're talking about. We're talking about, the question is, if you emulate the Prophet ﷺ in these acts of habit, do you receive a reward from Allah? If somebody now wears a turban on his head, like the Prophet ﷺ wore a turban, if someone puts on an izar, that type of wrap, waist wrap, like the Prophet ﷺ used to wear, if someone grew his hair long between his earlobes and his shoulders, or parted his hair like the Prophet parted his hair, would he receive a reward for these acts? And the point is that the strongest opinion is that you receive a reward for your love and for your desire to emulate the Prophet ﷺ, even if you do not receive a reward for that specific act itself. Yes? So we're going to come to that in a second, the approvals of the Prophet ﷺ. And now we're just dealing with his acts. Any questions on the acts? Yes, back there. Okay. If the Da'if Hadith, right, deals with what we call the Fada'il, or the virtuous acts, alright, and it fulfills those three conditions mentioned by the scholars, that the weakness of the Hadith is not greatly, it's not very weak, in other words, it's not a fabricated Hadith, it's, because weak Hadith are different degrees, so it's not that weak, okay? Two, that virtuous act already has been established in the Sharia by other authentic evidences. Three, one does not believe, or one does not affirms out of certitude that the Prophet ﷺ said such words, then according to one party of scholars you can act upon it. No, it'd be considered weak. We're talking about weak hadith. I mean, Hassan is past that, yes. Right, and so therefore, I mean, obviously when you take any single act of the Prophet ﷺ, as Brother Abdullah and maybe others mentioned, I mean, one has to look at the sum hadith regarding that act to try to determine, did the Prophet ﷺ do that as an act of worship, or did he do that as an act of habit? That the Prophet ﷺ had acts of habit, right, that he did not intend by legislation for the Ummah, is something which we cannot, deny. Not every single thing the Prophet did was meant for us as legislation. But now, what falls under this half and what falls under this half, well, this is when you look at the evidences, you determine it, you determine that through that. Yes? Okay. Yeah, as we finish the discussion of the Sunnah and the Ijma', we will come to discussion of the interpretation of the sources of law. And one of the subjects we'll discuss in there are what is the value of a command and what is the value of a prohibition, whether that is found in the Quran or the Hadith. Right, so that's like a coming class. We'll be discussing commands and prohibitions. Allah commands us something, right? The Prophet commands us something by one of his statements, obviously, right? So Allah prohibits us from us something. The Prophet ﷺ prohibits us from something. What is the value of that? Does that command indicate that it's obligatory, or does that command indicate that it's recommended? Does that prohibition indicate that it is forbidden, haram, or does that prohibition indicate that it is makruh? We will discuss that in a few coming lectures, probably today, maybe, or tomorrow. Yes. I don't know. We'll find out when we get there. So, okay. None of it's used for the same objective. I mean, sometimes, like for instance, I'll give you an example of the guy phrasing to Hasan, okay? Let's say we have narrator, okay, here we have the Prophet, okay? And here we have the companion, okay? And here we have narrator A, and here we have narrator C, okay? Now, where's narrator B? Well, he's unknown. So therefore, this hadith is considered weak because narrator B could be the greatest liar on the face of the earth, could be someone who's completely trustworthy, okay? Could be someone who's trustworthy but of weak memory, right? So we would grade this hadith as weak because we do not. The chain is broken, okay? We have another hadith coming from companion. Let's say this is companion 1, companion 2. It's the same hadith, and then this is A. Let's call this now D now, okay? And this is, well, let's call this A still. I'm sorry, excuse me. A, and this is D, but here we find out who B is. Okay? We find out who B is. So we say, oh, well, this chain of narration is sound, it's complete, all the narrators fit the qualities of integrity. This hadith now, which is the broken chain, right, is now raised to Hasan, لِغَيْرِهِ, Hasan because of something else, which is this. But that's unlike what the brother was asking about the weak hadith, because that's the hadith which still stays weak. It hasn't been raised to the Hasan stage. I don't know of a hadith that the meaning is 100% correct and the chain is established with it. This one? So this one be, I mean, on its own merit, this is sahih. And this was initially da'if, but because of this one, right, it has now become Hasan because of this, or Hasan li ghayrihi. Inshallah, maybe the third time we do Musalah hadith. So let's just, yes. Yeah, we're going to come to that right now, okay. Now, yes. Narrators. There's not a minimum number, but usually the least number is 3, usually. I mean, in terms of the books that are compiled, usually the least number is like 3 between them and the Prophet. Like Imam Ahmed, you might find 3 between him and the Prophet, for example. Okay, now let us discuss one type of issue concerning the acts of the Prophet. And that is what his acts are known as his khasa'is. The Prophet's khasa'is, or his unique characteristics. There are a certain number of acts done by the Prophet ﷺ which are unique to him alone, and the legal value pertains only to the Prophet ﷺ. And the legal value is not with regards to his ummah. An example would be the incumbency of praying at night. It was required for the Prophet to pray at night. But for us it's not, yes? Initially it was, but then it was abrogated. But I mean, the point is, for now, as for us, it is not, it's not obligatory to pray at night. And so therefore, the Prophet ﷺ has a number of unique characteristics. One is his permissibility for him to marry more than 4 women. The Prophet ﷺ was allowed to marry more than 4, but for his ummah, the maximum amount of women a man can marry is 4. Okay. Now, these unique characteristics normally are found in the books of fiqh, in Kitab al-Nikah. I mean, if somebody wants to find now a listing of the unique characteristics of the Prophet ﷺ, open any fiqh textbook, look in the book of marriage, and you will usually find a list of the unique characteristics of the Prophet ﷺ, and that is because the majority of the unique characteristics of the Prophet ﷺ pertains to matters of marriage. And so therefore the scholars of fiqh usually, in terms of those fiqh books which are, medium-sized texts or larger texts, will list them there. But when we come to an act of the Prophet ﷺ, how should we interpret it? Should we interpret it as an act which is particular for him, or should we interpret it as an act which is intended for the ummah? What should be the rule? Well, the rule is that we interpret his acts to be for the ummah unless there is a specific evidence to the contrary. When the Prophet does something, we should interpret it that the legislative value is for the ummah as a whole, unless there is a specific evidence to the contrary. One example would be when the Prophet ﷺ used to do something which was known as al-wisal in fasting. And what that meant was that he used to continue to fast from the night until the day. When some of his companions wanted to emulate the Prophet ﷺ in that act, he forbade them and said, I spend the evening with my Lord. This is a rough translation. And he feeds me and gives me drink. So in other words, the Prophet ﷺ was, and there's a difference as to what it meant that he feeds him and gives him drink. Some people say that it's a spiritual type of nourishment which the Prophet ﷺ would be able to sustain without having to rely upon actual physically or eating or drinking. But irrespective of that, the point is that here is a clear indication in this hadith where the Prophet ﷺ explains that this act of al-wisal was for him alone. All right. So when we come to an act of the Prophet ﷺ, we are to understand it that it's for the ummah as a whole, unless there's a specific evidence to the contrary that it belongs to him. Now, there comes one matter which we need to discuss regarding the acts of the Prophet ﷺ. Even though we will be discussing later on, inshallah, regarding when we have conflicting evidences, how to deal with them, this is sometimes best just to deal with this one aspect of that topic at this point. And that is when we have a statement of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam and an act of the Prophet which are contradictory or incongruent. There's no way that we can interpret the two in a way that we can act upon both the statement and the action. So how do we deal with it in this case? Well, in this case, we take his statement to apply to the ummah, and we take his act to apply to him alone. Statement of the Prophet ﷺ is conveyed to us by a correct chain. Act of the Prophet ﷺ is conveyed to us by a correct chain of transmission. The statement and the act cannot be reconciled. We try all the different ways of reconciling the statement and the act, like if one general, one is specific, one is abrogating, one has been the abrogator and the abrogating text. None of these fit. So what are we going to do here? Well, we take the statement of the Prophet ﷺ to apply to the ummah, and we take the act of the Prophet ﷺ to apply to him alone. And if you look at your handout on this brief essay of Usul al Fiqh, on pages 18 and 19, right there in the center of the booklet, it says, for example, when the Prophet's statement is incongruous with his deed, his statement is given precedence over his deed. This is because his statement represents either a command or a prohibition to his ummah. In this case, his deed is interpreted to be a unique ruling specific for him alone. The unique rulings, or the khasa'is, pertaining to Prophet ﷺ are based upon this principle. Okay? Likewise, when the Prophet ﷺ does something as an act of worship, but does not command its performance, the correct opinion is that his action is indicative only of the praiseworthy nature of that action. In other words, it's mandub. However, when he does something as an act of habit, his action is only indicative that such an action is permissible. That's just a summary of what we just discussed. Yes? Yeah. No, it's the same in the sense that if we can, as I mentioned, if we can interpret one as general and the other as specific, for instance, so the specific qualifies as general, we'll take that course of action. If we can say that one abrogates the other, we'll take that course of action. But if all the means of reconciling conflicting texts cannot be applied, so then we're faced with the position of taking two texts in front of us that cannot be reconciled. We cannot deny any of the texts because they're both authentic. So we say the statement applies to his ummah and the act applies to him alone. The name of... Yeah, well, as I mentioned, we'll have a whole lecture on that towards the end of the course, inshallah. An example. Okay, let me see if I have a text. One of the problems with Usul al Fiqh, unlike Mustalah al Hadith, is that a lot of their principles have no valid examples. So that's just the fact of Usul al Fiqh. Anyway, I'll look for an example and try to bring it to the next class instead of spending time with that. Okay, let us now come to, we have about, how much time do we have before? 5 minutes? Okay, 5 minutes. We have a little time. Let us now take the approvals of the Prophet ﷺ so we can close the lecture. The approvals of the Prophet ﷺ refers to one of two things. Either something is said or done in his presence, or something is said or done outside of his presence but reaches him. So something is said or done in front of him, or something is said and done outside. He wasn't present when it was done or said, but that information got to the Prophet ﷺ, who was transmitted to him. The approvals of the Prophet ﷺ are to be understood like his statements and his deeds. If his approval of a statement is like him saying it himself, and his approval of a deed is like him doing that act himself. Moreover, in interpreting the approvals of the Prophet ﷺ, we look at what was he approving. If he was approving something to be forbidden, then we understand that that matter is haram. If we understand for him to approve of something as makruh, disliked or blameworthy, we understand that that is then therefore blameworthy. If he approves something as mubah, therefore we understand that to be permissible or mubah. If he approves something to be mustahab or mandu, recommended, we understand that to be recommended. And if he approves something to be obligatory, we understand that that is obligatory. So, in terms of the approval, we look at the approval as either a statement or a deed, depending upon what the Prophet ﷺ was approving. Was he approving a statement or was he approving a deed? Moreover, the legal value of that statement or deed in terms of what are the 5 categories does it fall into, wajib, mandu, mubah, makruh, and haram, depends upon what was the Prophet approving. And so therefore it can fall into any of these 5 categories. And that was summarized, again, on page 19. The statements and deeds acknowledged by the Prophet ﷺ are to be judged as permissible or otherwise in view of the manner in which he acknowledged such. Okay, are there any questions regarding the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ? Yes. No, the statements of the Prophet ﷺ are never divided into that thing of acts of habit or statements, are considered to have a legal value to it. Now, the question is, does his statement indicate that it is a obligatory act to do, or does it indicate that it's just recommended to do? That's another issue which is addressed when we come to the next, after we finish ijma' and a couple other points, when we come to the issue of interpreting the sources of law. As I mentioned, we'll have a section on the commands and the prohibitions of the Quran and the Hadith. What is their legal value? So the issue of the habit refers to his acts. Yes, Abdullah. The acts of the Prophet ﷺ. The acts. Yes, the majority of the scholars hold the latter view. Few voices amongst the scholars of Usul al Fiqh hold it obligatory for us to comply to his actions. غير مؤكدة. غير other than مؤكدة. I haven't read exactly, their arguments specifically. Those few scholars who see it as obligatory, I'm aware of their opinions only because the others refer to their opinion and say that some people have said that they say it's obligatory and that this is a weaker opinion. But actually, as to actually read their opinions as they have written in their books, I haven't done that. And so I could not say if they make a distinction between Sunnah Mu'akkad or Sunnah Ghayr Mu'akkad. Yes. But the other point, the point to make though, it's a minority opinion. The voices of the scholars of Usul al Fiqh, you find only about 3 or 4 voices that say so it's obligatory nature. Yes. Yes. If his approval, right, approval with his dislike of it, right, it's indicative that that matter is disliked. As I said, not as I said, but as I translated the author's text, that the statements and deeds acknowledged or approved by the Prophet ﷺ are to be judged as permissible or otherwise, as mubah or otherwise, in view of the manner in which he acknowledged it. So if he acknowledged it as something makruh, it's understood as makruh. Okay. Initially, right, remember, what do we say about the makruh? The makruh is permissible to do, but it's better to leave, right? So, you do get a reward for leaving it. Yes. No, but the point is that we're talking about his approval of something, and it was a statement. So, the issue of the habit and so forth is not coming into it. Yes. Approval of the Prophet ﷺ? Okay, an example would be when Abu Bakr, when there were two small girls were singing some sort of songs from the day of Ba'ath during the time of Eid. A day of Ba'ath was a day among the days of Jahiliyyah where the Aus and the Khazraj were into a war, so they were singing sort of like poems of valor, right, and chivalry maybe. And so the Abu Bakr entered, and these girls were singing to Aisha, and the Prophet ﷺ was there with his back turned. Abu Bakr entered and was angry that they were singing in the household of the Prophet ﷺ, and he said, are the horns of the devil, the mizmar of the shaitan, in the household of the Messenger of Allah ﷺ? The Prophet ﷺ said, leave them, for every people have an Eid, and it's our Eid. So the Prophet ﷺ concurred to Abu Bakr's description that it was from the Mazamir of Shaitan, but allowed it for those little girls to do it in front of Aisha. That's an example of an approval. Another example of approval would be the Prophet ﷺ's approval of them eating lizard on his table, or when he was present, even though he did not eat lizard himself. Another example would be of something which reached the Prophet ﷺ, was the fact of people, when during the battles, the Prophet's companions would not want from their captive girls to give birth or become impregnated by them, so they would withdraw from them before releasing. And so therefore this, as Jabir said, we used to do this while the Quran was being revealed, meaning that had it been something which was forbidden, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would have sent something to indicate to its prohibition. Excuse me? Now it's permissible now. Huh? That's the Latin term for it. Yes, I think you... Inshallah. That's true. If my throat goes out, inshallah, you guys can give the lecture, inshallah. Okay, anyway, I think we need to prepare ourselves for Salat al-Dhuhr. When we come back after lunch and so forth, we'll do ijma' and the other evidences. Jazakumullah khairan.